The Metroid Prime series of games is known to be a masterpiece of environmental storytelling, and it all started with a small gaming studio full of upstarts from Texas, who Nintendo took under their wing after acquiring them. Will Prime 4 be able to follow up in its legacy? Welcome to the Retro Studios Retrospective.
Welcome! Today we're going to talk about Metroid Prime 1, the 2002 GameCube game, then Metroid Prime 2, Metroid Prime 3, the Wii game, Donkey Kong Country Returns, also from Retro, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze for the Wii U, and now Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, which just released a few days ago. And of course, Retro's future and what we hope from Retro Studios. So, when Metroid Prime released on the GameCube in 2002, a lot of Metroid fans, especially that love the 2D Metroids such as Super Metroid, which is one of your favorite games of all time, they were very concerned about how it would be, especially in that time with Halo and Doom and all these different shooters. People were thinking, oh, are they just taking Metroid and destroying it in some kind of shooter when they heard it would be a 3D shooter? And Retro really took the philosophy of the 2D Metroids and then just put it into a 3D perspective. That's something they told already in a few interviews. They didn't have shooting as one of the main elements. They only had it as something to support the exploration and also the Metroidvania style storytelling with a lot of great elements in this game. But Tav, you played Metroid Prime 1 pretty much almost till the end. How did it come to life?
Metroid Prime 1 is actually interesting in the sense that it wasn't even supposed to happen really for the GameCube. As you already said, it was the first Metroid 3D game, and people have been waiting for all the bigger franchises of Nintendo to make the jump from 2D to 3D in the Nintendo 64 era. You had, of course, Star Fox, which was already on the Super Nintendo 3D game.
Yeah.
You had Zelda with Ocarina of Time. You had Mario with Mario 64, Mario Kart. The big one that was kind of missing was Super Metroid, which was acclaimed, loved, and famous. There have been screenshots circulating of a Metroid game on the Nintendo 64, but Nintendo eventually shelved the idea and said that the technology wasn't there yet to produce what they wanted to do with Metroid. Interestingly enough, the company that ended up making Metroid Prime 1 for the GameCube was Retro Studios. Most of the people who worked there formerly belonged to Iguana Studios, who produced another very famous shooter series on the Nintendo 64, and that was Turok, a game where you shot dinosaurs with bows and guns.
Oh yeah, a classic.
It's also a classic, of course.
You also have it on NSO expansion pass.
The interesting thing is that basically Iguana were contractors for Nintendo, and then later they got bought by Nintendo and taken under their wings, and as a result of that they got to make Metroid Prime 1. I think the story goes somehow that Shigeru Miyamoto himself went to Austin, Texas, and he saw how these guys were working. He was like, okay, I like that game engine that they're using. They could do graphically cool things like a new Metroid game with that. And then he was like, but the projects they're doing and the way they're working, it's not really good. I think their team was quite small by the end. They had to fire a lot of people and change personnel and stuff. But in the end, they got around and made it. And I think they did a good job of Metroid Prime 1, just because they had a strong art direction. I've recently heard that in another interview or cast, they said that Metroid Prime 1, for the time, was one of the best looking games on any system, PC or
even on the
GameCube.
GameCube.
Yeah.
And it was one of the best too. Like, Metroid Prime has a 97 universal acclaim from critics. These were really amazing reviews. We will talk about them later. They put out Metroid Prime 2 and 3 then on the Wii, where they then also got Metroid Prime Trilogy on the Wii, which you played, and you played especially Metroid Prime 1, right?
Yes.
What was your experience with Metroid Prime?
Metroid Prime 1, to me, since it's a spiritual sequel to Super Metroid, especially, Super Metroid is for me kind of the perfect video game, in the sense that the best kind of games, to me, are games that show and don't explain or over-explain stuff. So, Super Metroid, in that sense, is the quintessential game that uses environmental storytelling. Super Metroid just has a small blurb of dialogue at the beginning. You know who you are, you know the backstory of the first two games, and after that you're thrown in, and pretty much the rest of the game works without ever needing to scroll through text or dialogue or have any other exposition or take you out of the gameplay. So the rest of the game, you go, you try to rescue this alien, then another alien comes, the space station where you were supposed to go on this rescue mission explodes, and you have to escape. There is a timer, it's obvious, okay, if you don't beat the timer, you're going to die. And everything else is environmental storytelling. You travel to the other planet, and then from there on you explore, you gain abilities. They don't even explain the abilities to you. You just get an item, it says morph ball, and okay, that's a morph ball.
You know which, then you just have to find out what to use that ball.
Yeah, but in Super Metroid there's so many things that are just amazing, yeah? And this is a Nintendo game.
They really translated it extremely well from the Super Metroid formula into a 3D space.
I think they did different things, especially in Metroid Prime 1. They really tried to be faithful to this ideal in Super Metroid. Because, of course, you have more text, more exposition, and in Metroid Prime 1, it's first person, you can scan things, and you have a map that is more detailed and explains things better. You also have some pointers where, after a while, the game tells you, okay, for example, the source of energy is coming from there, you should go there. But they don't ham-fist it. It's very subtle. Also, all the exposition is kind of optional. You can just run around, shoot stuff, and explore. Or you can scan every plant, every living thing, every organism, every enemy, every piece of data. And most of the time, this is just additional lore, or it's additional background story, or something that helps you beating like bosses. For example, if you scan bosses in Metroid Prime, it will explain in like technical or scientific terms, oh, it has an exoskeleton, this is vulnerable to that, it might be this or that, and it gives you...
It was a really interesting system. Also, like, they didn't really have a huge storytelling within the game itself, but really, if you scanned everything, then you realized how much was happening around you, and like, oh, you were in this nation, you have no idea what this is, and then you figure out, oh, it was the pirate station, but they had to flee because there
was contamination.
Yeah, and they broke out of their like experimental glasses and stuff like that. It's really interesting.
And in that sense, I think Metroid Prime is really different from Super Metroid, because while it keeps it like empty and isolated, and it really gives you that feel, the same feel you had when playing through Super Metroid, through these scan visors, it tells a lot of story actually. And I think this is also telling for the Prime trilogy in general, where people were disappointed the later games also had dialogue and other characters in them that Samus interacts with. But I think in Metroid Prime 1 all these things were already seeded kind of, because you had this richer backstory. Once you get more characters involved in them, it can't always be just Samus, you know? It makes total sense.
They also did that in Metroid Prime 4 now, which we're going to talk about a little bit later.
You have to say Metroid Prime 1 was a huge success, considering that the GameCube itself was not the most successful hardware that Nintendo put out. But Metroid Prime 1 sold several million, I think 3 million copies.
For back then, especially for the install base of like 24 million or something for the GameCube, that was pretty big. The best-selling Metroid game was Metroid Dread on the Switch, because it has just a 150 million people install base, which was a 3 million copy seller. So if you compare that, that's pretty big. And Metroid Prime Remastered, which was a remaster of Metroid Prime, released in 2023, sold a little over 1 million copies. That was also on the Switch.
Which is interesting, because this to me kind of says that the people who are playing Nintendo games or playing Nintendo Switch games, there are some who love Metroid, but it's not like this unanimously beloved franchise like Zelda and Mario is. Most people are, I think, not even aware that Metroid Prime exists.
Yeah, for
because
sure.
The game is so highly rated and praised by critics and players who are in the know. It's not like a casual shooter where you're like, okay, I'm just going to play through this. It's actually like a puzzle game. It's like one of the oldest Zelda games where you're constantly in the dungeons. You have to find the right solution, the right items, have to find the right path. And Metroid is pretty much that all the way through, especially Metroid Prime 1, where after the tutorial, where you're on a space station, you land on planet 4, and from there on, you're just exploring through the planet, and it's different biomes. You go through the water level, no area.
So
there are the caverns with magma and lava in them.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting and extremely well orchestrated. I played Metroid Prime Remastered last year a little bit, definitely like 10 hours or something, and then school got in the way. But I'm definitely still looking out for that, and it was extremely fun and really well done. Just how I got the items and how I learned them and interacted with them, that I could backtrack and different things like that. It's really well done and it looks absolutely fabulous, and I'm really, really hoping for a Switch 2 edition of that game. That would be amazing.
Yes, it's, I think, one of the best looking Switch 1 games already.
If not the best looking Switch 1 game.
Yeah, they really did a good job porting the graphics to the next gen.
Or
and I
three
think,
next gens or something.
yeah, and I think a great part of why they did that with Metroid Prime Remastered was just to test their technology and use the same technology on Metroid Prime 4.
I think it could also be that they just had the engine already for Metroid Prime 4 and then just took the Prime 4 engine for Metroid Prime Remastered because it was cheap and easy to do and would get more players into Metroid Prime 4 later if you have remastered before. You know what I mean?
You might be right, but I also think that Metroid Prime 4 looks a lot better and more sophisticated.
It just looks absolutely amazing on the Switch too.
Yeah,
you know
maybe.
what I mean?
Yeah,
it's, who knows?
But still, the spaces you see and the graphics that you're exposed to in Metroid Prime 4, I think on the Switch they also are going to look better than Metroid Prime Remastered. I think I'm not sure, but it seems like it was a stepping stone where they're like, okay, we're going to take the old parts of the game and then and then go from there to develop the graphics of the new Metroid Prime game.
Yeah, no, that could also be. So, Metroid Prime 2 released 2 years later on the GameCube still. It's a development cycle which would be impossible nowadays because just of the scope and the graphical fidelity of the games.
Nintendo gave them a deadline to release during the holiday season that year, and I think 3 months before the deadline, they were something like 30% done. They weren't able to cope with that really short schedule and tight deadline.
Even back then, 3 years was more custom, like the development time between Metroid Prime 2 and 3. Nowadays, it's around 4 to 5 years.
It's also that in Metroid Prime 2, they didn't recycle just assets and just made, okay, we already have the engine and the skin and
Similar
everything
to Zelda Tears of the Kingdom.
Yeah, in Tears of the Kingdom, they took a lot of what they already had, yeah? But for Metroid Prime 2, they didn't. It's not that they rebuilt it, but they did a new art style. They wanted to give that game its own identity. I think from what you know from Metroid Prime 2, because there Samus kind of enters the dark world, which is like you can switch between the dark world and the regular planet's environment. I have not played it at all, just a little bit on the trilogy on the Wii. Mm-hmm. And I must say, from what I've heard, it's first very punishing from a difficulty perspective, the kind of mechanic that a studio invents when they're like not really sure how to fill out the game, and then they're like, oh wait, if we do this where we just flip off the light switch, we can get this additional layer of complexity and depth into the levels. We don't have to build the levels all over again, and we can just redo them.
Just to explain that, in Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, that was the name of the game, you had a dark world and a light world. You came to the dark mode where you had some kind of a time limit because you lost life
You continually
all the time.
lost life, unless you had the light suit.
Later then, yeah.
You got that later.
It was a very stressful gameplay in general, which wasn't so beloved by fans. Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, they really just took the same things they already developed, made them more stressful, and put a whole new layer to it, which wasn't really the very best solution, but it was still an amazing game from what it was as a game itself.
I think people nowadays kind of come back around Metroid Prime 2, because for what it is, it's a great game.
Yeah.
But I also think that you cannot fight human nature. Kiwi Talks also talked about this exact thing, that players feel stressed out when you face them with these high pressure situations, and they can feel meaningful and interesting. In Metroid games, you have certain sequences where, this space station or spaceship is going to explode. You have to get out of there, and there is a timer. And it's usually on the regular difficulty levels. That timer is not too hard to beat. And now this timer mechanic is kind of one of the core mechanics in the game. And players in that situation, of course, always feel pressured to get to the next point. And it's kind of like, it never feels good to run out of time, even when you're playing one of the older Mario games. When you run out of time and die because of that, it's just a feel-bad moment. And I think baking that into the core mechanics of a video game is always kind of a bad idea.
Yeah, for sure. Like, as for example, Hitman World of Assassination, one of the best-selling games from the Hitman series, was just that you always have this situation of, I'm interrogating someplace and I have to kill somebody. How I'm getting there, I'm not trying to get caught, really. So you don't have this kind of stress, even though it is maybe hard. Once the alarm is on or something and you would theoretically have stress, you can just switch your outfit and go on a cover or something, or you're pretty much already caught and it's over. So there's really this difference between something that's stressful or hard, which Kiwi Talks also said.
In Hitman, it's also kind of the core mechanic of the game is playing around this. Oh, you're going to get caught, but you can also orchestrate everything that once the alarms go off, you have your escape route. You know how to get out and all that.
Yeah, no, that is very true.
For example, in Metroid Prime 3 then, on the Wii, which we'll be talking more in depth in a little while, there was a similar mechanic where you went into phase-on overload and your suit basically overloaded, and then you were super strong, and that was only for a short time where you took additional damage and you could do certain things you couldn't do otherwise, but you were also super powerful. So that felt kind of good in the sense, while also giving you this tension for a short while where you had to be careful.
It's a very cool game mechanic. Metroid Prime 3 Corruption was widely discussed also because they put some of the Galactic Federation troopers in the game, which a lot of people didn't like because Isolation was part of the Prime series and has always been, and it felt off. What did you think back then?
We had a Wii back then, and we also had Metroid Prime 3. It was not just that the Federation was more present there, you also had other bounty hunters who eventually, some of them stayed your friends, some of them eventually became enemies. The gist was, I think, on Metroid Prime 3, it was the first game where you could move more freely. When you went back to your ship, you could just choose another planet to go to, and the exploration kind of took part in a less linear way, like the planets and the locations you visited there were still kind of in the Metroid Prime vein, where you explored spaces, etc., and environments, but you could always go back to your ship and then check out other planets. It felt more open, and in that environment I think the other characters just worked I didn't feel at the time that it was that immersion breaking or anything. Because for me, this was really the first Metroid game that I played of the Metroid Prime series. So going back and then later playing Metroid Prime 1 on the trilogy on my Wii was a very different experience. And this was also after playing Super Metroid. When you're just playing Metroid Prime 3 in isolation, it doesn't feel really weird at all. It's just, oh, this is just how this game is structured.
Yeah.
But after having played Super Metroid and then playing Metroid Prime 1, it makes much more sense. I could see where they were coming from and what they were trying to accomplish. And once you have that perspective, I feel Metroid Prime 3 is deviating a lot, but it's also an evolution because, well, Samus doesn't have to be on her own, you know? Even though the games that were more successful and came before that, they kind of dictated that this was the way that Metroid is doing the storytelling most of the time. If you contrast it with the 2D games, for example, in Metroid Fusion and also in Metroid Dread later, which were not developed by Retro Studios, in these games, you have kind of very linear and very direct storytelling because you kind of have this Space Odyssey theme. The Stanley Kubrick movie, you have the computer of the spaceship who's constantly talking. This is a common theme in these older science fiction movies.
Yeah.
Where the computer is talking to the people on the spaceship. Eventually, it's always the same. You realize, oh, the computer is trying to kill them all. He's not their friend, he's their enemy. And this kind of narrative that spun around the computer talking to you is also present in these 2D Metroid games. I'm not of the opinion that Metroid has to be isolated and it necessarily only works that way. Like in one of the games, the Samus also talks to the computer.
But I still have to say that it's a very important part of the Metroid Prime series, even though there are parts where you're not completely alone. Let's say in Metroid Prime 4, you're on this planet with some Federation troopers, but it's still not like you have a lot of people or something. You're still alone on this planet and you are stranded and you have to find a way out. There has to be much bigger meaning in the end anyway. But what I'm trying to say is, even if there are other people, it's not like you weren't isolated.
Yes, in Metroid Prime 3, there were some segments where you had a companion, there were other people present, but it was never you're part of some squad and you have to coordinate and all the mission goals are centered around these other people. One thing I wanted to actually talk about with Metroid Prime 3, which was for the series very important, is motion controls. Because if you've played Metroid Prime 1 with the original controls, they kind of had tank controls where you had lock-on mechanics because they didn't properly utilize the twin sticks. That was not common back then. So what you did was you had a free aim mode where you could just free aim using the control sticks, or you could have an auto lock-on feature. And in the free aim mode, you could also scan around. But it was very tanky, like it felt you were stuck in there, which made it even more immersive, like feeling that you're in the suit. And for Metroid Prime 2, it was the same. In Metroid Prime 3, which released on the Wii exclusively, they had the motion controls where you had the gyro sensor bar of the Wii, which was, for me, a very immersive way of experiencing a shooter. Because it was really environmental, like looking around made me physically move my hand. And there were also some minor elements where you had the grapple beam and then you thrust your hand forward.
That was with the trilogy in general.
I think Nintendo felt that these controls really added something, and I have to agree because I've almost played through Metroid Prime 1 completely with these motion controls in the Metroid Prime trilogy.
Now, I have a question, because I know from the Wii they have these strange nunchuck things. I never played with the Wii, so I want to ask, how were they utilized in Metroid Prime?
Very much the same as in Metroid Prime 3. The nunchuck is an add-on to the Wii mode, where basically it gives you a stick, because the Wii mode only has a D-pad and some buttons. And it has the motion sensor. So if you want to utilize the motion sensor, but at the same time have some form of control, and the motion sensor was your camera essentially. So the control was on the movement stick, which was on the nunchuck. And the nunchuck also had 2 buttons where you could shoot, etc., and use abilities. So in combination, this felt very natural. I feel they really added something with the Metroid Prime trilogy. Playing through the remastered version, I now use the twin stick method just because it's more natural as a shooter and I prefer the Pro Controller. But if the controls on Nintendo Switch were better, because it's a gyro sensor and it's not calibrated to the Wii motion bar, because there is no bar with a Nintendo Switch, I don't use the motion controls all the time because it tends to drift off a bit. It's not as easy to control as it was in
well,
the
back
Wii.
then it was really primarily made for that 100% because there was not an alternative.
Yeah, the Wii motion bar was just always there. So you also had to always face the TV when you were playing, of course.
But still, I think it's really great that with Metroid Prime 4 and with Metroid Prime Remastered, you can just switch between the normal controllers and the motion controls, and now with Metroid Prime 4, the mouse controls. I think that's really cool.
I'm really looking forward to see how Metroid Prime 4 shakes out with the controls.
But you played with the mouse controls.
Yeah.
Yeah, you talked about it in the first episode about how you played with the mouse controls.
I did, but then again, that was like I was sitting at a desk and I had the big TV in front of me. It's a different experience than sitting on the couch. When I'm sitting on the couch, I want to chill, and I can't imagine myself just kind of laying back, being in a sitting position, and then having a mouse pad on my lap or just playing on my thighs. This is not really my jam.
Very funny. So, between Metroid Prime 1 and 3, there was 5 years of development, and probably more, so like 7 or 8. And people at Retro, I think, normally when you get one game out, you have a grand idea and it's really exciting. And then everything you couldn't put into the first game, you can put into the second game. And then it's already very tiring just working on the same game every time when you're working on the third game. So what is my assumption is that they were asking, can we do something different? And Nintendo was thinking, well, we don't really have anybody that does our Donkey Kong games anymore, which was rare back then because they got sold to Xbox. So why not do Donkey Kong Country? They brought out Donkey Kong Country Returns 2010, 3 years after Metroid Prime 3 on the Wii. So, Donkey Kong Country Returns was released a few years later also for the 3DS, where you played it then. And 2025, actually in January, they released it on the Switch. They called it Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. So yeah, what did you think of the game when you played it on the 3DS? I tried it out a little bit and I really liked it from the gameplay.
I actually played the game as well on the Wii.
Oh.
But I must say, it had one of the symptoms of a lot of games during the Wii era where they used the motion controls and they kind of inserted them instead of just having an extra button that you press. You had to shake the controller. And this is what you did whenever you used the stomp ability of Donkey Kong. Apart from that, which made the controls a bit more wonky because you had the Wii mode, which you used with the D-pad, etc. And the controls were just fine. But you had to shake the controller, which was kind of less.
I have a question.
Fine.
I know for the Wii U they had a Pro Controller, like just a normal controller. Mm-hmm. Did they have that for the Wii too?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so they did.
And yes, but you couldn't just map the shaking the Wiimote to a button.
Oh, you couldn't.
So when you had the Pro Controller, I assume you also had to shake it or something.
Oh, okay.
I cannot say. I never had a Pro Controller for the Wii. The proprietary Nintendo controllers for the Wii were very, very strange. Just to wrap it up on Donkey Kong Country Returns. I think Nintendo essentially gave Donkey Kong Country to Retro because they did such a good job on the Prime games and the Prime trilogy. Probably because they also wanted to do that.
Yeah, and I think Returns definitely was a big success in the end. Because they, 4 years later, for the Wii U, made Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. A game that we never played because we didn't have a Wii U, and then didn't buy the deluxe whatever funky mode version on the Switch.
Yeah, I will get that game eventually. I've heard it's very, very good. Donkey Kong Country Returns is just so cool because it's so true to the original Donkey Kong Country. Like, it's a speedrunner game on the one hand. It's also a game where you have a lot of secrets and collectibles on the other hand. And it's just so fun, even though it's very punishing. You only have 2 lives. So, in total, you can get hit 3 times. And, like, after getting hit 2 times, you lose Diddy Kong, who has the jetpack and helps you the most. So the game is not easy at all. It's a very hard game. Some levels are just very skill testing, where you have to hit frame perfect jumps, etc. The minecart levels on that game are crazy. And from what I've gathered in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, they just took everything to the next level, also because they had better graphics, art direction.
I just wanted to say, like, the art direction in that game is supposed to be amazing. Like that, what they did with Metroid Prime, they just put into a 2D Donkey Kong game. They have lava areas, a lot of ice areas, as you know, like all these different biomes. And what I've heard, it's really great and amazing game, like pretty much every other game Retro put out till date, you know.
My favorite Donkey Kong Country Returns level is actually the one where it's a sunset and you only see the shadows of the actual level where you jump around as Donkey Kong. And you have this smooth jazz music, the art direction.
It's called silhouette levels.
The silhouette levels.
They had that in Returns and then in Tropical Freeze, and it was so well.
With fog.
It was so good that they even took that over in Super Mario Bros. Wonder as Wonder mechanic.
Oh,
really
absolutely!
Cool.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, they definitely took that as an inspiration from the retro Donkey Kong Country games. Yeah. And I think that's something you really saw what I just talked about with Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. They did that too with Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. They had this really amazing game with Returns, but they had so many more ideas that they wanted to put in Tropical Freeze.
Did Tropical Freeze sell well?
Well, it was on the Wii U.
And then on the Switch.
And then on the Switch it sold quite okay. I wouldn't say
because I know that Donkey Kong Country Returns actually sold well.
Yeah, sold well. I think Tropical Freeze sold also well. Not extremely well, but not bad or anything. It sold quite solidly, what I heard. So 1 year after that, Bandai Namco Singapore starts with a new project that they really don't know a lot about, and it's in pre-production. They show Nintendo a few things. They're working for Nintendo. They have this contract with Nintendo that they develop for them in the next 10 years or something. It's really interesting because it's exactly 2015 where they start working on a game called Metroid Prime 4. Yes, Nintendo is thinking of Retro doing Donkey Kong Country games from now on, and Bandai Namco Studios Singapore should go on doing the Metroid Prime 4 series. They worked on that game for like 3 years until the whole idea gets scrapped because Nintendo just didn't like it. 2017 they even revealed it and said it's now in development, but 2019 or something they announced that they were somehow unhappy with the version that Bandai Namco Singapore gave them. But back to Retro Studios, which developed Metroid Prime 4 Beyond then, which released a few days ago. Just a month ago, Nintendo announced that they are going to purchase Bandai Namco Singapore and rename it to Nintendo Studios Singapore. So it's on a full circle. Now, 10 years later, the contract comes to an end, but they did a good job and they want them back. And I can imagine that actually Singapore, Bandai Namco, or Nintendo Studios Singapore is maybe behind Splatoon Raiders. Well, the real Splatoon studio is working on an Animal Crossing, or Splatoon 4. Who knows what they have to offer for Switch 2.
First off, I think that's great news. Like, in the times we're living in, you only hear about layoffs and awful news regarding game studios especially. And it's great to see that Nintendo, they're not only contracting these companies, but they're also doing the right thing and acquiring them after fostering talent, supposedly, and then utilizing these people, right? I'm
Yeah,
also
they're not
looking
buying any of the IPs. It's not like they worked on many Tekken games, but it's not like they get the Tekken IP, obviously. It's just they have the workforce, which is something very unique and great to hear and see.
I think the last time I've heard something like that was when Blizzard Entertainment acquired Vicarious Visions after they did such a good job on porting Diablo 2 to modern systems.
There's a very good other example, too, that I know of. Shiver Entertainment was a company that wanted to develop games, I think, by themselves, but while they were working on their own games, they were porting games, and that's what they're doing nowadays 100%, and especially to Nintendo consoles, like Mortal Kombat, Madden NFL, FIFA, like EA FC nowadays, and they ported Hogwarts Legacy, which was a good port for the Switch back then, onto the Switch, and yeah, so Nintendo was really impressed and bought them for the Switch too, because they were saying, oh, we want some more companies that can help other developers port games on the Switch too. Without Shiver Entertainment, they wouldn't have been able to get WWE 2K to the Switch 2, as for example. They were the developer of that port. 2K wouldn't have done it. Really, Nintendo wanted this game on their console, which is why they paid it with their own money.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that Nintendo is putting a lot of resources into making sure that Nintendo Switch 2 has the proper third-party support, even though it's not very easy to develop for the system. Even if you
it really
isn't. Have dev kits, it's not a given that we're just going to port this game to the Switch 2.
No, but they're really pushing these third parties too. They just released an ad for Star Wars Outlaws on the Switch too, even though that port came out months ago, you know? It's not like they're giving up on these. They're really...
Well, it's also the holidays and they want to sell games now.
Of course, yeah. In fun fact, I just bought Star Wars Outlaws physically for the Switch too, because it was the gold edition and I want to have it portably, and I'm really excited to tell you everything about that amazing game.
You're probably going to finish it over the holidays.
Yeah, I hope so.
Right.
Something else that will happen over the holidays is you will get Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, which just released. We're very excited already. But Metroid Prime 4 Beyond got a lot of criticism through the overview trailer because of these troopers, especially this one guy.
You have sidekicks, basically.
Yeah, Miles Mackenzie or something. So people are now really wondering what Retro's future will be. But what are you expecting from Metroid Prime 4 first?
Well, I have a different question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever feel like Retro Studios had the Midas touch, that anything they touched turned into gold?
No, I don't think so. I think that they did mistakes, but whatever they did was great because they just had the talent. But it's not like that you could just give them whatever IP and they would make something amazing out of it.
It's funny how they struck gold right on the first one, right? With Metroid Prime 1. I think that is still considered the best game. I also feel that the resonance of Metroid Prime Remastered on the Nintendo Switch reminded everyone of what an amazing game this was. Like, there are a lot of people who would say this is one of the top 5 best video games in any genre, any platform, any era, you know? Like, it's up there with games like Super Mario World or Ocarina of Time on the 64
Definitely.
and other amazing games. I also agree. I don't think that Retro Studios are infallible. I don't think that everything they do turns out the absolute best. I just
Something else that you also may not forget is between the Metroid Prime 3, 2007, the very least really still developed on Metroid Prime 4 after Metroid Prime 3.
They're not the same people.
They're not the
of course.
same
They're
people
not the same
either.
developers.
That's something that people think, yeah, maybe these people got mentored by the people back then, but it's still not the same developers.
Yeah, I highly doubt that there are a lot of people left who made Metroid Prime
too.
1 and then also had contact with the people, folks at Retro Studios who made Metroid Prime 4 now.
Yeah.
But then again, I feel that they have a lot of talent and they work very hard, and Nintendo in general, especially with their first party IPs, they have a very high level of quality control, I feel. So Nintendo won't put something out that is just of subpar quality.
Yeah, you see that with the cancelled Bandai Namco Studios Singapore game.
Yes,
Yeah,
of course.
definitely.
Yeah.
Metroid Prime 4 is the most expensive Nintendo game ever, costing them 100 million was the price for the development without the marketing, which is also big.
I think that also has to do, to be fair, with the fact that visually, the visual fidelity of Metroid Prime 4 is really high.
Yeah.
Like usually Nintendo
But also,
games,
especially because of the cancelled version too. That's something
yes,
you may not
of
forget.
course.
I mean,
and
that's
it has been in development for over 7 years now.
8 years pretty much. Yeah.
So, but then again,
Almost 10,
what I'm
yeah.
trying to say is usually Nintendo games, they're not famous for looking so good, having this high level of detail and
You have the first hyper-realistic Nintendo characters, really, in the new game, like Miles McKenzie.
You mean in terms
That
of
they
humans?
look like really like humans, yeah.
Yeah,
because-
that's interesting.
Yeah. No, like even in Mario Odyssey or something, they looked more comically, you know.
Well, but this is on purpose, of course.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
In Nintendo games, you usually don't have humans.
That's a Mario
Like
game,
even in
but-
the Zelda games, where technically you have humans, Hylians, they're always stylized.
Mm-hmm.
You never had any sort of hyper-realistic looking Zelda game.
But I have to say, Metroid, I think, is also very catered to an older audience, especially now with the Switch 2. They're definitely trying to serve that with the mouse controls, with the high fidelity graphics, with the humans, with all this realistic stuff. And then also, of course, the gameplay. I mean, shooting is something that is seen much more for, like, teenagers or older people. I definitely think that they'll deliver with Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, and if you're out there and you have a Switch or a Switch 2, that's definitely a must-get, and it's a really amazing game. Whatever they do, it has to be a certain kind of quality because they're under Nintendo and the Retro Studios. So that's just two factors that make them amazing.
Actually, I wonder what's next for Retro Studios, because I wonder, like, after working on a game like Metroid Prime 4 with these huge expectations, are they going to follow up by doing a Switch 2 exclusive Metroid Prime game?
I hope so, at
Metroid
least.
Prime 5 or something?
I think it really depends on
or
what...
are they burned out and they will just want to do something else entirely?
I think this was a really restart for them for the Prime series, so I think they can have this sequel moment again, maybe.
Like what they did with Zelda Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Galaxy, essentially, where they were like, whoa, this was so hard to produce, let's take this technology and just
do something crazy with
do
it.
something and just build on it.
Everything that we dreamt of and that we couldn't get in the game. I hope so, at least, because I think they have definitely a lot of potential. And if we haven't seen a Donkey Kong Country game since 11 years, and they didn't develop that in this whole of time between 2014 when they finished with that game and 2019 when they got the new drop, if they didn't develop a new Donkey Kong Country game in that time, I don't think they will go back to Donkey Kong Country. And I'm sure some kind of other studio is taking care of that because, well, Donkey Kong has become a much bigger IP for Nintendo now. It's their flagship 3D jump and run on the Switch 2. To push that, they released Donkey Kong Country Returns HD this year, as I was already saying. They have a new theme park and all these things. You will get a new movie soon. So I think they're definitely centering more on Donkey Kong than they were
But then
in the last
again,
movie.
it's been over 10 years since the last 2D Donkey Kong Country game came
Exactly,
out.
with
So
Retro.
maybe they already have something in the pipeline.
That's what I'm thinking too. They're working on something, but not retro.
Maybe it's not retro.
Yeah, I also don't think it's retro. I think retro will maybe do Metroid Prime 5 for the Switch 2, and then let's see, who knows?
Maybe something completely different.
Maybe something completely different. Exactly, yeah. But because we see they can do something completely different with Country, like it's an extremely different game to Metroid Prime.
Do you think that Nintendo would ever greenlight a Metroid Prime game that was more open world in the sense of you could just move around more freely?
Like more like Zelda Breath of the Wild from the... Yeah.
Somehow, yeah, where you can also just travel.
I think I
in
can
Star
imagine.
Wars,
I'm sorry, but
like in Star Wars Outlaws,
like
where you
in Star Wars Outlaws, yeah.
travel through space to different planets.
I can really imagine that this whole sand area whatever it's called. That's also somehow of a prototype of that open world. You know what I mean? Yeah, let's see how everything works out. We're definitely talking about Metroid Prime 4 Beyond more in the next year. And
I'm really wondering how this open space and how transportation will work in Metroid Prime 4 with the viola, with the bike.
Yeah, I think it's like interconnected or something, and then yeah. So I'm extremely excited for Metroid Prime 4, and so should you. And whatever is coming for Retro in the future. That's it for the Zac and Tav Podcast 2025. We're going on Christmas break, and next year you'll get some better content with whole redesign of more videos with even footage we're planning. So stay tuned, and if you stayed until now, please subscribe and like, and
Thanks for listening.
Bye.